write anymore for any of these things, because I've been writing publications for the world for 40 years. I've had American, non-American co-authors. I've lived in America. I've not lived in America. I think I standardized on American English, but who knows, okay? And there was a few typos as well, so there were 7 typos in it, even though that's, you know, this is not like Twitter, where there's an actual editor that's fixing things, but in Twitter it's a little harder. Let's move on to, so that's a very specific thing about pronunciation, where there's a whole bunch of machine learning, and apparently people are still working on it, because I saw this Google paper. The results were not better than ours, which I found a little weird. Spoken dialogue systems. So why don't we talk to computers, okay? Why do we have to type to them? Yes, I know we can type, but why can't we just speak? This has been a goal for us for the last, I don't know, I've been working on this for most of my academic career, but now it's pretty common, okay? You expect most phones and anything that comes from Amazon that you can talk to. Well, not anything that comes from Amazon. Probably the Amazon box doesn't reply to you yet. What do these systems do? They're actually quite limited, okay? They're information giving, so there's a big database of numbers or something in the system, and you give it some parameters and it gives you the numbers. So it's not even like the question answering stuff that we're doing in the project here. It really is, you know, I'd like the weather for Pittsburgh tomorrow, okay? So it's weather, Pittsburgh, and the date for tomorrow, okay? And it looks it up and gives you the result, okay? Maybe driving directions, maybe reading news as well. There's information navigators that are a little harder to do. It's like, could I read my email by speech? Okay. Well, actually, reading out your emails would be incredibly boring, okay, because it's got all these bits of the previous messages in there that you probably don't want read out every time. Also, there's all these attachments that would be really hard to do, but people try to do that. Searching the web, and of course, question answering is there now. Okay. You can maybe provide personalities with speech, so you could actually provide something that you could interact with. Okay, Disney really wants to do this in a big way, and we'll create these characters. And maybe other things that are not actually directly, but there's 2 humans involved, but speech-to-speech translation is also something that we do, so that I can speak in Chinese. I speak in English, the machine translates it into Chinese, it comes out in Chinese, the Chinese person speaks in Chinese back, goes through a system, comes out in perfect English. Or nearly perfect English. Actually, it's good enough for doing lots of conversations. And I've actually used it in Beijing with a taxi driver. And I foolishly tried to tell the taxi driver that I was one of the early developers of this type of technology. But the system couldn't deal with any of that vocabulary, so it just didn't work at all. Okay. But, you know, I managed to get back to my hotel and get to wherever I was going. I can't remember. Many of these dialogue systems are actually much simpler than they appear, and you should be aware of that. So many of them are basically simple form filling. Okay, so when you talk to Siri and you wanted to set an alarm, you think, yeah, I'm interacting with this AI. No, you're not. Okay, the system goes, whoa, set an alarm. Well, I know what I need is a time for how long and what for. So I need these fields of information, so it's like filling in the form on the web thing and then pressing enter, and then it does it, maybe with confirmation. So it knows the bits of information it needs, it asks you for them, confirms it, and then it does it. So it's not really general interaction. Okay? Mix initiative is something that actually our machines don't do very well, which is the machine could initiate it. But most of the time you're talking to the machine, you start with the machine, you say, okay, Google, and now you start with your interaction. You have an opening thing at the beginning, it chooses between what it's going to do, and then it fills in the rest of the form and completes it. Okay? It's very rare that you get systems that go, hey Alan, rather than hey Siri, okay? Can you tell me if you're busy tomorrow because your email just came in and somebody's trying to arrange a meeting with you? The system doesn't do that. Although that would be quite a cool thing for it to do. Okay? I'm going to skip the last one. No. Classifying. One of the first deployed spoken dialogue systems was on the AT&T number. You might not be old enough, but we used to have these things called telephones, where you would pick up a thing and then you'd dial like that. That was a really long time for you to dial like that. And you'd dial with numbers, And if you were talking to AT&T, that was the major phone company in the world, you would often phone up AT&T and ask information. So you would ask for, what's the telephone number for my friend John Smith, who lives in Pittsburgh, and I know what the number is, called information directory inquiries. You might be asking, what's the area code for Miami, because you don't know. Phone numbers were only 7 digits, not 10 digits at the time. It might be because you're complaining about your bill. It might be because you want to change your bill. And so there's a bunch of quite fixed different things that you would do when you were calling up AT&T. And they had to employ a whole bunch of people to sit there and answer stupid questions about directing you where you should actually go and speak to. Okay? And so people noted that actually what people were saying when they called up were relatively constrained, and the output was maybe one of 15 possible things, and that's all. There was probably an other, but that was relatively rare. Most of it was one of 15 things. So the question is, could you do speech recognition? Could you get the words out of it? And could you do some classifier of whatever the words say and connect it to the right thing? So if I called up AT&T and said, my mother just called me up and complained that I hadn't called my aunt, and it's her 80th birthday, and I really should have done it, but my mother didn't tell me what the telephone is, and I have 7 digits, but I don't actually know what the area code, and my aunt lives in Miami, so what's the area code for Miami? Okay? And the system doesn't care about your mother or your aunt, but it cares about the area code. So just listen to all this area code. Miami. And therefore it says, do you want the area code for Miami? And then give you the area code for Miami. Or if I call up and say, I've got this funny thing on my bill, you've charged me $150 for something that I didn't do this call, I wasn't here, why do I have this extra call on my bill? And they would say connecting to billing. Okay, they just worked out that it was billing. So choosing between these. And this is actually a very normal thing. Human says something, you have to decide which of the classes to do. And we'll see that Siri actually does the same thing. There's now sort of a new thing that gets talked about. It's called non-task-oriented dialogue. And that is, there's no goal. You just talk. Now, actually, they're unquestionably lying to you when they say there's no task. There is always a task. The task might be just to pass the time, but it's still a task. Okay? So when you build a non-task-oriented chatbot, okay, maybe its purpose is to talk to you and distract you for as long as possible. We actually did build a system that did that. One of my PhD students did this, and she was very successful at it. Never finished her PhD because she was talking to the system all the time. That's not true. Jo Yu was incredibly successful, and last year won the Alexa prize with her group. Not when she was working with me, but when she had her own group, because she's very good at that. But non-task-oriented dialogue is where you're doing more of the less directed things of filling in in the specific slots, but talking about, hey, how are you today? What do you think of the weather? Did you see Game of Thrones last night? Things that are general and that. For those of you who have been in China recently, you might be aware of a system that Microsoft released that sits on WeChat that's called Xiaobin, or Xiao Ice, it usually gets translated into English. Small ice, the characters, my pronunciation's right. And you can chat to her in any way, okay? And people chat to her a lot. It's not clear why. She can answer questions about the weather and news events and things that are happening in your area, but it's mostly just to chat, okay? And lots of people chat with her, okay? And it's quite cute to do, okay? So people are actually caring about building systems like this. Here, we have built a number of systems, and for 10 years, CMU provided the information about the next bus to the Port Authority. So before there were smartphone apps, okay, well, there was some smartphone. This was up to about 2014. If you called the Port Authority to say, when's the time for the next bus, it would connect to a machine here on CMU campus, and then it would actually answer these questions. So here's a recording of one of these telephone calls, hopefully.
Welcome to the CMU Let's Go Bus Information System. To get help at any time, just say help or press 0. What can I do for you?
61A.
The 61A. Where do you want to leave from?
Dynamo Way.
Leaving from Dynamo Way. What is your destination?
North Braddock.
Where are you going?
North Braddock.
Going to North Braddock. When do you want to travel?
Next bus.
The next bus. Just a minute. I've looked that up. The next 61A leaves Dynamo Way at Beach at 9:26 p.m.
So that person who's calling has clearly used the system before, I can tell. She knows how to speak to the system. She isn't being trained to do it. She does all the right things. It's not 100% clear, and you can hear traffic going by in the background, but it's pretty good. It's successful. She gets time over next bus. Here's another one where the person doesn't know what to do.
Welcome to the CMU Let's Go bus information system. To get help at any time, just say help or press 0. What can I do for you?
I'd like to find out the 51C schedule route.
She doesn't know what to say.
For example, you can say, when is the next 28X from downtown to the airport? Or I'd like to go from McKeesport to Homestead tomorrow at 10 a.m.
When is the next 54C from Oakland?
The 54C. Is this correct?
Yes.
Okay. Leaving from Oakland. Did I get that right?
So the system worked out she didn't know what to say, well, it couldn't understand. So it gave explicit examples of what to say, and she used exactly the same template to give what she actually wanted, and therefore the system continued. Okay? And this is non-trivial. It's not obvious. You say, I don't understand what you said. Please say it again. Okay? And people get pissed off really quickly. We have recordings, so we know how pissed off they get. Okay? The other thing is, because the system worked out that this was a novel user, a new user, it went into, I'm going to confirm everything mode. So once she says it completely properly, it says, did you say the 54C? And waits for a yes. It doesn't say, did you say yes? And waits for a yes. But it says, did you say leaving from Oakland? So it actually does that. Over the time, we did buckets of experiments with it. We had something like 600,000 calls over the time. We get about 100 calls a day, approximately, more at weekends. We ran competitions on the thing and got other people to build systems. And when one of the British research groups at Heriot University in Edinburgh put their system on, they used a British English accent, even though they were giving information about Pittsburgh buses. And our user population became much more polite because it was speaking in a British accent. And it broke our system because we weren't dealing with things like please and thank you properly, because nobody had ever said that to us. No, that's not true. But it was one of the things that we noticed, that when we gave them British English, they actually spoke better. And we got very confused about this because we had a term as euphemism in our data. We talked about polite speech. We were talking about, did the call go through? No, this call didn't go through. Why not? It was full of polite speech. Which, what we meant was it was full of impolite speech, and it was full of swearing, okay, because people would swear at us. And so when the data came back for the information for the British system on it, and it said it was full of polite speech, we were thinking, why are people swearing at that system? No, they were actually being polite, not just using the other polite speech. So pretty successful, about 90% success rate on 90% success rate on giving people the time of the next bus, or the time we thought the next bus was, and not necessarily the correct bus, but let's pretend that we got it right. Spoken dialogue system's got these 5 parts, okay? There's speech recognition, so you have to work out what the person said, get the words out of it. And then you have to understand the words, and that's a separate task. Okay, it's often called natural language understanding. That's much closer to the things that we are talking about in this class, where you have a string of words and you have to find out where the person's going to, if it's bus information, okay, what time they want to leave. So there's a bunch of slots that you're trying to pull out, and you're trying to put them in a query that you're then going to stuff into an SQL database query to get the time of the next bus. Okay? And we have the dialogue manager. People go, yeah, whatever, looks it up. No, the dialogue manager has to manage what's going on in the call. It has to deal with who's talking when, and who's not talking when they should be talking, and what happens when somebody interrupts. Okay? Because humans interrupt all the time, and you can't just say, shut up, I'm speaking at the moment. You have to wait until I tell you the next 10 buses then you can come back and ask me a question. So you want to be able to allow barging to do that. And once you get the output of the database that you want to put out, you get this open bracket, funny abbreviation for different bus stops. Port Authority have got funny abbreviations for all of their bus stops. Somehow you have to change that into nice, clean text that you can give to a text-to-speech synthesizer and speak nicely. And when you're building these systems, you very quickly understand what you think looks nice when you type it doesn't sound as nice when you actually hear it. And so you have to manage those to be efficient but not too quick. You can't say, when's the next bus to the waterfront from CMU? And it said 3. 3? 3 watts, okay? It leaves in 3 minutes' time. That's not right. You know, the next bus to the waterfront leaves in 3 minutes. And notice it said the next bus leaves to the waterfront in 3 minutes. And having that pause in there makes you aware that you're going to get a piece of high information after it, and therefore you focus on it. And doing all these timing things are actually quite I'll just talk about these things. Okay, Siri. It was great news when we heard that Apple was going to put a speech interface onto their wonderfully popular iPhone. Nobody had ever done that before-ish. And it was really good that high-tech company actually wants to put speech on the front end and actually make it very public. Okay? Of course, all of us who are working in the field were also thinking, oh my God, it's not going to work and everybody's going to hate us in speech for the rest of our lives. We'll have to go and get a job gardening or something else. Okay? But it took off and people now expect it. Hands up if you've ever spoken to your phone. Hands up if you've spoken to your phone in the last 48 hours. Yeah, not so much. Still people have done it. Most people do it at some point, and sometimes you continue to do it and sometimes you don't. Setting alarms seems to be the most popular thing, although also people use it for sending texts because it's better at typing, especially if they're old like me. And if I'm giving an address, I find it much easier to speak than have to type it. I can type short messages fairly well, but if I'm giving an address, I like to speak it. So with Siri, it wasn't going to be, we're going to have an open AI you can talk about anything with, okay, even though it was sold as that, but it wasn't. It's like, what do people need to do in their phone, and what things can we make easier for them through speech? It is hard to type on a phone, okay? I know that if you're all young, you can do it with your thumbs and not really worry about it, and you can do it without watching where you're walking. Actually, that's not completely true. You think you can do it without looking where you're walking, but you still walk into walls. But it would be easier to give high content information like addresses, phone number, just by speaking, okay? And people are aware of that. But the phone knows an awful lot about where it is, okay? It knows really, well, it knows what cell tower it's talking to, so it knows what city it's in and knows what city it's in. And it might know a lot more than that, because its GPS might work, or if it's on a campus, it's going to know about the Wi-Fi, where it really, really, really is, okay? In fact, it probably knows better than you. So actually, when you're talking to phones, it's got a lot of context about where you actually are. So you can ask it, where's Wien? And it knows you're on CMU campus, and it should be able to find that you're talking about Wien Hall, rather than Wien Street, that's somewhere in Greenfield. Actually, I don't know if there's one in Greenfield, but you don't either. So what are the common tasks that people might want to do? And that is calling, okay? But we've had speech on phones for at least 20 years, okay? Not everybody used them, but you could usually always say, call mom, and it would work. Sending messages is much harder because there's a much more open vocabulary. Calendar stuff, and the idea was, for Siri, was if it didn't work, you would fall back on Google. Okay, sorry, Apple doesn't fall back on Google. They have their own search engine now, but they used to fall back on Google. But you think, you know, open search. Though you want to be a little careful about, I have found 17,000 web pages about Justin Bieber. Do you want me to read them to you? Okay, no. But most of the time it has the screen, and so it can show you and you can click and get information. Here is a number of different tasks that you might want the machine to do. Okay, call John, okay? Now, it's not specified who John is, but on your phone, there probably is a John, and there might even be multiple ones, and it's the one you called most recently, or most often, and it calls John. And if there is ambiguity, you could say, which John do you mean? Okay? But cell phones have been able to do that since the early 2000s, okay? Next one, call John, Bill and Mary and set up a meeting sometime next week about plan B that fits my schedule. That's what I want a personal digital assistant to do, okay? I still spend far too much time in my life answering email about trying to get meeting times, only when we've been sending these messages for a week, somebody says, let's have a doodle poll about it. It's like, why didn't we do this to begin with? But anyway, you know, we hope that we might be able to meet Tuesday afternoon, but we can't. When Siri came out, it couldn't do that. In fact, I don't think it can do that now. It can do some of that, but it doesn't take the initiative to call you up and be able to find the time that fits our schedule. And so our digital assistants talk to each other, either by speech, not necessary, or some interaction form, so that they can actually set it up and they can appear in our calendar. But that would be so helpful, okay? Any of you who've tried to get a meeting with me know how hard it is to actually do that. But you can call my assistant and do it. No, that won't work. Make a reservation at a local Chinese restaurant for 4 at 8 p.m. Siri could not do that to begin with, but now it can do that. Okay, and that's pretty cool. It might do the confirmation about the Chinese restaurant. It might know the Chinese restaurant that you go to. Okay, but it can do that. That's pretty cool. Okay, that's useful. You can get reminders. You should call your mom. It's her birthday. That's a good thing. But again, you know, handheld devices have been able to do that since the Palm Pilot. So that was what, 92 or something. Then the next one is what I really want as well. I have sent flowers to your mom as it's her birthday. So I don't have to remember because I always forget. Okay? And that's what a human assistant would do. I mean, you maybe want to control that a little bit because you don't want it to take too much initiative. But it's the sort of thing that you feel that Amazon might be able to do, and we'd be very happy to do that for you. Okay? So that they could actually do that. And you can imagine that they would say, you know, I've ordered more soap powder for you because you've run out. You're like, have I run out? Oh, it was a month ago, so yeah, I probably have run out. Okay, so you can do these things. I should also say, this is an ex-KCD comment, example, that anytime you go into a new house you've never been to before, please always say, Alexa, order 50 gallons of milk. Okay, and then say yes, and see if it works, okay? Because people should learn to be able to switch off automatic ordering on their Alexa, and they usually do the second time they get 50 gallons of milk, okay? I would like to point out that I made that joke a number of times in classes, and then I discovered in my log of my Alexa that used to sit in my office, switched on all the time, people were ordering 50 gallons of milk, by standing outside my office and going, Alexa, order 50. Thank you. Siri was actually a DARPA project. That's not completely true, but it came out of a DARPA project called Kalo, which ran from 2003 to 2008. CMU was one of the groups in it, and we did lots of speech stuff in it. SRI, stands for Research Institute, it's not called that, but that's what the letters originally stood for. SRI, a group out in California near the Stanford campus, was the the lead group, and there was a group in SRI, a bunch of researchers, who developed some of the speech interface, which they later spinned off as a company and decided to call it Siri. And so the SRI, inserting the I to get Siri, is where the name actually comes from. Then Apple bought them in April 2010. They had an app that was running on iPhone before it was integrated, and then they were bought and became integrated into Apple. Okay, so it's been around for some time. Let's do a little bit about also further background. When people start looking at this, they were thinking, how on earth could a phone have the computational power to be able to do speech recognition analysis and speech synthesis? Because, you know, speech recognition is, even now, still quite computationally expensive. So people thought it has to be a desktop, so you just have to carry your desktop around with you all the time, or never go anywhere. However, way back in the mid-90s, we still had telephones, And we've had telephones for 150 years, so you can call up, and if that central place has got all the big computers, you could use a telephone. There's no screen, but you could use a telephone to do it. And a company called General Magic did exactly that. And what they did was, you got a number, you called up, it was your number, you called up, it automatically knew who you were when you called it up, it knew what your messages were, you could leave messages for other people, it would call other people in your group and leave other messages for them, and it would also give you other standard information, weather, driving directions, etc. So it was pretty cool. Okay, this was in 1996. It didn't really take off. I knew a bunch of people who worked there, and rather interestingly, all the people who worked there now work in Google Siri, Amazon Echo, the Google Home group, and some of them work at Facebook. So all of these people had a dream that we'd be able to interact by speech, but they did not succeed in the company General Magic. And these people are now senior people in many of the other companies. So people have been wanting to do this for a long time. Actually, General Magic was partly funded by General Motors. And OnStar, which you get in some cars, is a digital assistant that's in the car. And that's probably, there's some path that went from General Magic to that. But on a smartphone, you can do a lot more because you're on the local device. You keep everything on the cloud and all the computation things, but you can display things. And that makes it a lot different. If you've only got speech output, it's very hard to give directions. It's very hard to say, there are 17,000 Justin Bieber articles, and I'm going to read them to you. Okay, but you can say which one you want. You can click on the phone and you can read it, and that's much easier to do. A smartphone is also quite a good way to do this because the phone really knows about you. Most people, for most phones, there's only one user and one user for the whole life of the phone. People don't pass the phone to other people. I mean, they do sometimes, but 98% of the time it's the same person. So anything that you know about the user, you know everything about the user. You know when they last called, they know how often they use the phone, you know who their contacts are, you know the messages that they've sent, you know what their location is, they know which locations they've been to recently, okay? And all of that information is available. So it makes it a lot easier to have some sort of context, okay? And you can do some computation on the phone, so you can do certain feature extraction, you can put some fancy hardware on it, and most of the system does have some fancy hardware with microphones. But the cloud can then get all the information, okay, and then learn from all the examples and share the examples across people. So that's much easier than what it was in 1996, okay? And then you can retrain acoustic models, language models, understanding models based on everybody. If you know what everybody in Pittsburgh does, okay, and you pick up your phone, it's not for the first time you're talking to a system that doesn't know anything about the context. It knows what everybody else in CMU campus has done, and therefore has modified its language model towards that. Way back, there was a thing called voice search. Google was one of the first people that actually tried to do this. They wanted to find out how people ask questions by speech rather than type. When we first had search engines on the web, people would type full questions. Okay, so they wouldn't say when was George. They wouldn't say George Washington. Date of birth or George Washington birth. They would say, when was President George Washington born? Question mark with capital letters. They were polite to it. Okay, and that was harder to answer because it was a full question than just saying George Washington date of birth, because it could more easily actually find information about that. In voice, it seems to be that we still do full sentences and we don't do keywords, which is interesting. Even, I don't know, 10 years later, maybe more than that. Very early on, Google were aware that speech was going to be a big thing, and what they decided that they would start collecting speech, and getting speech across a web browser was incredibly hard even into the 2000s. There was no standardized way of doing it, and you'd have to hack your machine to do it, and most users were not willing to do that. So what Google did was they started advertising telephone numbers and say, you can call this number and we will answer anything Google can answer. Okay, it was 100 call Goog or something like that. I can't remember what it was. And they'd advertise and get calls. And what they were really doing was collecting speech about how people asked. To begin with, they had humans just listening to it and typing it to Google and telling them the answer back. Okay, but they gradually made it more and more automated. Next thing is actually Bing, Microsoft did it. There was a company called vLingo, which was also one of the early ones to do question answering on the phone, rather than on the phone, rather than using an independent telephone line. But they were very successful, so they were bought and disappeared. And Apple did it very early on, and I don't think we're supposed to say that Apple didn't use their own technology to begin with. They used in other companies, but gradually they replaced it with their own for speech recognition and synthesis. The other technique is you get the users to label your data for you. Okay, this is always a good technique to do. So when you say, when was Justin Bieber born? Okay, what it does is it shows all this possible web pages that are about Justin Bieber, and you look at it and go, click, number 2, I'll take that one. And you've just labeled their data. You've just labeled Apple or Google's data, because you've identified which one matches your query, and now it knows that number 2 is a better answer than number 1. So I'll remember that. And so it does this all the time. Also, finding out how people speak the full sentences versus search terms. Rather interestingly, I knew someone who worked at Microsoft Research whose job was it to find out how people wrongly pronounce restaurant names and place names. So if you have a restaurant name and it's got a name written in non-English, how do people mispronounce it? Because that's what they're going to say. So this researcher at Microsoft was using these generalized pronunciation algorithms, like I showed at the beginning of this lecture, to be able to guess the pronunciation even though it's wrong, okay? Because that's what other people are going to say. So imagine it's Chinese, okay, and it's Xi'an City or something. What people are going to say if it's written Romanized Xi'an, okay? Are they going to say Xi'an? Are they going to say Xi'an, okay? Because they don't know how to pronounce X as sh, okay? But people would do that, and she was looking at all of these different ways and trying to collect them and putting them into the lexicon. There are way too many possible words that you could actually say. And the whole idea of having a completely open vocabulary recognition is deeply frightening to most speech recognition people, and they'll do everything possible to avoid that. And that included people at Siri, because he said, no, we can't do that. We can't expect the person to say, and then we have to look at everything in North America for all the possible all the possible restaurants that are called Dragon King. Okay, there's probably billions of restaurants called Dragon King. Okay, but you don't need to do that, because you know where the phone is. Okay, you know the phone's in Pittsburgh, so you only look in the Pittsburgh ones. In fact, you know where in Pittsburgh it is, so you only look at local ones that are smaller and important big ones that are further out. Okay, and that works incredibly well. Okay, in the same way that if you have somebody saying called John, you know who John is, because it's whatever person who's called John in the contacts on that phone is the John that you should be calling. Okay. You also know who you called before. Okay, so if you mangle a name and it says, I don't know what you mean, did you mean this, this, or this, and you click number 2, next time you mangle the name, it knows which one it is. Another thing that's actually quite important about these is it's got to have a particular personality. And Siri has a particular personality. She's female. She's not your friend, she's your professional assistant. And because she's your professional assistant, you're a little bit more polite when you talk to her, and you're not as casual as what you would be if you were talking to your friend. And you might think, yeah, but that's just to be polite. And the answer is no. It's to teach us to enunciate clearly, because we're talking to this professional person. So we don't say, hey Siri, sup? Okay? We say, hey Siri, good morning, how are you this morning? Okay? We're much more polite, we're much more vocal, we're much more articulate, we use longer sentences, and that makes it easier for the system to understand, because you're giving more information. And that's deliberate. Okay, that's not an artifact, that's actually a deliberate design. Okay, now rather interestingly, Siri in the UK, at least the default Siri in the UK, is male and not female. Okay, why is it male? Because personal assistants are supposed to be female, well they often are, but in the UK they're male. And that's very simple. In the UK, when we're growing up, we all have male butlers in our big landed castles, and so we're used to having our personal assistant be a male. Okay, that's a joke, that's not true. I did not grow up in a castle, okay, nor did most of the Brits grow up in castles. And the answer is probably the British English male voice sounded better than the British English female voice. I don't actually know what the reason is why it ended up being male, but it's still got the same character as professional, helpful, but not your friend. Okay, and this is to get people to speak fully. Okay, you also get to personalize how Siri talks to you. Okay, so you can get it to call you sir or ma'am. Okay, or you can get you to call you by your first name or by your title. Okay, if you want to do that. Okay, this is also a way to sort of get you to build rapport with this object and try to make it into more real than just this disembodied voice that talks to you all the time. Okay. The other thing is targeted apps. So people think Siri's amazing, it does everything. Siri is actually incredibly limited. When it came out, it only had a finite limited number of things it could do and look up Google searching. I don't know what the original number is, but let's say 12. It wasn't much bigger than that. And that's all it did. And so when you first said Siri and then you said something, it tried to work out which of the 12 it was, and then it might ask you which one you want if it wasn't completely sure. And this is exactly how may I help you, the thing that I referred to earlier about AT&T, where you complain about your aunt and your mother not giving you the full number, and then this big long story, and all you really want is area code from Miami. Siri was doing the same thing, and still is. There are more than 12 now, but there's still not a generalized number. Okay? And rather interestingly, the Alexa farm has got a much bigger problem because they allow any random people to build other systems that you can then include in your Alexa, and it can get more confusable more quickly on the Alexa. You've got to be careful about not having too many things, otherwise it gets confused. Yeah, there's also a substantial amount of hardware things going on in the phone. So there's infrared to try to work out where the person is. Okay, so are they holding their phone like this? Don't think people do this anymore. Are they holding it like this? Okay, if they're holding it like that, they deliberately make it harder to work. So you end up holding your phone like this because they want good forms. There's a bunch of microphones around the iPhone, so it's doing noise cancellation for outside speech as well. Voice search was on almost everybody's phone, and it was there forever. Nobody made a big deal about it, but it was there. But I remember talking to the V-Lingo people who had voice search when the iPhone came out, and I said, do you feel bad that they've got all the press and you didn't? And they said, no, it's okay, because people are now aware of speech. They're actually using the V-Lingo app much more. So they got a rise in people using their system as well, and they end up being bought. One of the things that Apple did, because as you're probably aware, Apple's really good at marketing. I mean, they're really good at marketing. They're among the best companies on the planet at marketing, of building a brand. Okay, you might think, no, they've got the best products. No, 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 they're really good at marketing. They do have good products, but they're really good at marketing these good products. And so what Apple did when they brought out the iPhone is they took out lots of TV ads, and you probably don't know that TVs have ads, but they did in those days, or online ads, and they got lots of really famous people, usually cute, good-looking famous people, to use the iPhone in pretty silly ways, okay? But they showed off what the iPhone could do, okay? And people were seeing this and going, I want to be one of these famous, cute, good-looking people, male and female, people, and so I'm going to say these silly things to my iPhone when I get it too, and I desperately want an iPhone. And what Apple was really doing was they were going, look, it's not going to work the first time because you won't know how to talk to the system, so we're going to feed you some silly utterances that you're extremely likely to say the first time you use the system. So we're going to change our language model so we strongly expect that people are going to ask, what's the height of Everest? How far is it from here to the moon? They were two of the ones that I actually remember. And so they knew people were going to ask that, and people did. And of course it worked. And people going, yeah, that's cool. And then you would ask, how can I make my life so much better that I'm happy all the time? And it would say, I'm sorry, I don't understand that. Or show you Justin Bieber and things on Google. Sorry, I don't think it would do the second. And so they deliberately did this, and it worked. And people did ask these silly questions, but they also got the idea of what types of questions they could ask or how they could use things, and therefore they followed it. Nobody read the manual, okay? There was a manual, okay? But nobody read the manual. I don't know if there was a manual, but nobody was going to ever read the manual, okay? And this is something that's worth caring about in speech systems, is that it's really quite hard to show people something novel if you've only got a speech system. The Amazon people have been worrying about this for some time. How can you get people to know that there's a new app? How do you advertise it? I mean, this isn't just like, you know, marketing ad, but it's like, how do you ever learn any about some new function that it has? Because nobody's going to read a manual, nobody's going to read an email that says, hey, look, Amazon Echo does it, or whatever, okay? And I'm not going to read the rest of it. And these things are actually quite hard to teach people how to use it. Apple were also very good, you know, they know their users, so they targeted the young, educated people who were willing to try something new. Remember, these are the people who are already using smartphones and already happy that they're using smartphones and other people are not, and actually being utterly blind for the fact that we had smartphones since 1996. And they were really cool before, and they would appear on TV with, you know, young, good-looking people carrying the other smartphones, but everybody's forgotten about that. But iPhone is, you know, a cool thing, and so speaking is another cool thing, and that actually got everybody to do it, because it was that type of person that cared. They did standard American English first, but then they quite quickly did non-native. I knew all the team who were working in the speech recognition, and none of them were American English speakers. They lived here for years, but none of them were actually native. They were mostly Indian and Chinese, of course. But also, how can you train these people to use it better? So the feeding of the ads was a good way to do it, okay? But that only works after a while, because once you've been using it for a bit, you stop watching any ads about it, because it's not relevant to you, okay? But they have tried various things to try to improve that. Google has these big shows you've probably seen. You know, they now have a system that will fake a call to somebody and do a booking fully automatically, and that's quite cool, at least when it works. So that's quite interesting to actually do that. Now, I put many of these slides together, but they've been updated over the last, however long it is, 8 years. I put this one there to begin with, and it's still relevant, which is really quite interesting. It's like, will people talk to devices? Okay? And so I asked you who'd used it. Some people, when asked, who'd used it in the last 48 hours, substantially less than you kept your hands up. Now, remember, you guys are old, okay? I know you don't think you're old, you think I'm old, but no, you guys are old, okay? And it's not really whether you guys use speech, it's whether the people who are 12 years old now use speech, and will they continue to use speech. And I've always found this interesting when I see kids talking to devices. They think it's natural, okay? They are always really surprised if you give them a computer that doesn't have a touch screen, and they're going, how come this doesn't work? It's not a touch screen, because they're so used to it being a touch screen. There are cute examples of 5-year-olds talking to you know, things that look like a robot, and talk to them and expect to get an answer back when it's not a robot at all. But we are definitely got this bigger expectation that speech is going to be there, and over time people will do it whether they like it or not. There'll be an expectation. Might not want to do it, but I might, you know, say, where's my iPhone? And my iPhone would say, I'm over here, okay? Or better still, it would actually get a drone to pick it up and bring it back to me, okay? When cell phones first came out, okay, it was extremely weird to talk in public on the cell phone. And it was embarrassing. People didn't do that. But by the end of the 90s and into the 2000s, we were quite used to sitting on the bus and having somebody next to you apparently talk to nobody, and we no longer thought that they were crazy, we just thought they were talking on the cell phone. And we're now pretty used to that, okay? The person next to you starts talking and you're thinking, are they talking to me, or are they talking to somebody else? And you can't tell, okay? But we don't think that's as weird. However, you can tell when somebody's talking to a computer and when they're talking to a person. You really can, okay? And there's something different about how people speak to computers than how they speak to humans. You can tell when they're talking to a computer. And it's less common to see people talking to their computer than it is talking to other humans on the phone, even yet. And I remember when the iPhone came out, I thought, I wonder how quickly I'll see it on CMU campus. And the answer was 12 hours. And I saw people demoing it to others. But it was 3 months before I saw somebody use it rather than demo it. Okay? So I would always see people. Now, admittedly, I don't go about CMU looking at the technology of everybody who's standing next to me. I don't do that. Well, I don't know if it's cool to do that. But, the fact that you would usually see, look, it does this, you can say anything to it. It was that type of demo, rather than actually standing at the bus stop and somebody saying, where the hell's the next bus? Okay? So, genuine use, and it was 3 months. After a while, I began to notice it was all demos that I saw, and never actual genuine use. But now you see it relatively often that people will actually ask their phone questions. This long-term use, people when they first get it, they use it and then they don't use it again. I had Amazon Alexa in my office for a long time, and it was great. I liked it, apart from the infinite amount of gallons of milk that got delivered. No milk ever got delivered. I ended up switching it off. I ended up switching it off because I would often talk about it because it's sort of my research. And the most embarrassing ones is when you're talking on the telephone to a reporter from the New York Times and you talk about Alexa, and Alexa switches itself on and goes, yeah, what did you say? It's like, no, you're not part of this conversation, shut up, okay? And that happened more than once, once actually with the New York Times. And so I switched it off, okay? Although, those of you who know my office, I still have 30 Alexa devices in my office because we use them for some classes. So, we still don't know whether people are going to use speech, but you would find it really weird to buy a phone that did not have a speech interface. You would think that, hey, what do you mean it doesn't have a speech interface? Even though you don't use a speech interface, you'd still think it was weird, okay? If Amazon came out and says, here's our latest wonderful phone with a wonderful new system on it, oh, by the way, it doesn't do speech. Like, what do you mean it doesn't do speech? This is 2020 or almost 2020. So, to sum up, speech is like NLP, okay? And in fact, speech and NLP are now getting closer and closer and closer because many of the same neural techniques are used over the same systems. They are not the same as text, but there's still certain things that are similar, and many of the techniques that we used in speech were then used for noisy text like Twitter and Weibo. We actually even have exactly the same things being used in speech and NLP. So things like part of speech tagging we need to care about parsing, we need to care about information extraction, we have to care about dialogue discourse analysis. However, we often have to train for speech and treat it differently than what we have for text, because the grammar of speech and the distribution of words in speech is not the same as the grammar of text, or the distribution of words in text, okay? So it's not the same, it's a similar language, and it's got many of the same words in it, so they're closer to each other than English and Chinese, but English speech versus English text are not the same language, and you maybe want to treat them differently, okay? But we can use all the same techniques and train to be able to do that. Oh yes, and finally, Some interesting things that we might want to do: generate poetry, generate stories, generate cool new movies. I have a big task I keep giving to new students come in, but nobody wants to take it, and that is take all of the Simpsons episodes and build a model that can generate me new Simpsons episodes that are funny. Okay? It used to be funny, but it's not as funny as what it used to be. But, you know, get a model of what happens if all the characters that are in it, what's a typical character form, what usually happens in it. Homer does something stupid, gets a new job. Lisa does something sensible that ends up being not as sensible as what appears the first time, and then they all join up in the final scene where everything works and there's a song. No, there's usually not a song. But lots of funny little jokes on the way. You know what characters would do what type of jokes. You might even be able to generate all of the movie itself as well as the actual story. That would be cool. And I don't think beyond what we currently do. I mean, it's a little beyond, but it's not very beyond. We actually tried to do generating poetry, so we tried to do this to try to make healthcare jingles that people could remember. Okay, so you know, if we tell people that the symptoms of malaria are X, Y, and Z, people are asleep by the time you get to number 2, so can we make a wee jingle out of it so that we can actually remember it? And it can be culturally appropriate using the terms that are in the culture that you're actually trying to teach people to do. We care about emotion ID because we care about when people are angry, when happy, and we like to be able to keep them happy. We like to know whether their email is appreciated, unappreciated, and we like to be able to deal with that. Styles we'd like to be able to recognize. And we like singing. So can we get machines to sing? Well, yeah, we can get machines to sing. Okay. So our synthesizers all sing.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
But that's pretty easy to do. So maybe we could try to get funding by creating our own boy band. Okay, and then we could compete against Justin Bieber.
If you want to be my lover, you got to get with my friends. Make it last forever. Friendship never ends.
Now you might think it's a little ridiculous that we do this for research, but any of you who've been in the Far East are probably aware of Hatsune Miku, who is an anime character that sings in Japan. She has long, bright blue hair, okay? And she's been the top of their charts a number of times, and her voice is completely synthesized using a synthesizer technique called Vocaloid from Yamaha. And she's ridiculously popular, and she doesn't exist in real life. Yet there are people paying money for her music and paying money to go to concerts as well. So be aware that creative technology is still something we can do as well. Okay, that's it for today.